everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Southampton Business School Placement Podcast. Each episode, we are going to explore a new topic from students' experiences, getting the employer perspective on placements, as well as how you can make sure that you are the most competitive applicant in your placement search. If there's anything in particular that you want us to cover or discuss, then make sure you drop us an email at placements.sbs@sutton.ac.uk. So this week, we're lucky enough to be joined by one of our international students who undertook their placement last year. So I'm going to hand over to Rose to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rose, and I'm a third-year accounting and finance student. Well, fourth year now, because I did a placement during my third year. I am from a tiny island in the Caribbean called the Turks and Caicos, which is ruled by the Queen, so technically we're a British overseas territory citizen, but I am still indeed an international student, and I undertook my placement at GE Aviation, which was then sold to Aeronova and is now called Hamble Aerostructures Ltd.
Okay, and what kind of area did you do your placement in? So you were in the finance department, am I correct?
Yes, I was the financial planning and analysis intern for the year.
Okay, brilliant. So how long did it take you to secure your placement with, GE Aviation that then became Hamble Aerostructures?
About a few months, only because they took ages to reply. I did my application at the start of the term. I remember because it was the first company that I applied to.
Yeah.
And then I did my video interview in October, and they didn't get back to me till about December about me having to do more stuff before we can move on to an actual interview. And then I did my actual interview in February and secured the role in February.
Okay, so a good couple of months. It's a case we see with a couple of them where they'll open pretty early in the year, but they're waiting for that deadline to close, and then there's a few steps before you get to that in-person either interview or assessment center or things like that.
Yes.
So what were those extra steps, that kind of stuff you did in the middle? Was it tests or?
So firstly, you had to do an application form, and then once you did that, you did a online assessment. And once you passed that, then you had to do a video interview. And then after your video interview, you had to email them and tell them why you're applying for the role and which one of their locations that you would want to work for, because they have several locations across the UK. And then from that, if you're successful, then you get called in for an interview.
Oh, okay. So a good few steps. So very, I mean, I already said it, but congratulations. That sounds like a good few steps to getting that placement, which is great. So on all of those steps, I was your placement officer for the majority of that time. So what did you find that was quite helpful from the placements team, either during that one-to-one support or kind of through your first year as well with the online course that you do get access to?
Well, in the first year, they taught me how to actually write a good CV, because prior to that, I don't think my CV would have gotten me any jobs.
Okay.
So first year, we learned how to write our CVs and cover letters and application preps and stuff like that. And then when I first started applying for placements, I would just come to Chloe for help if anything needed correcting. And I remember when I had to do like my email over the Christmas break, I kept emailing Chloe, like, can you check this for me? I want to send this off, but I want it to be okay. And then prior to my face-to-face interview, we had like a couple of interview prep sessions. The day before my interview, we did a final one, but I was so sick that I didn't even want to go with it. You said to still go with.
Yeah, this was a time pre-COVID where I wasn't too worried about someone with the sniffles. That was the thing. It kind of seems weird now. But yeah, definitely. I think the feedback is really the key point, because I think with you were really keen on this role as well. So I wanted to make sure that you were going in with like the strongest application you could. And with each of those steps, I think we were both like, oh, okay, yeah, so this is the email. Okay, let's change that a little bit and make that sound a little better. And yeah, like with the interview, I was like, okay, come in for the final one and then relax and try and rest so that you can make it to the interview.
I tried to rest, and then I showed up 2 hours before my interview.
Very prepared. Very prepared.
Very prepared. To which the manager who was interviewing me, she was like, "You're very early," and I was like, "Well, I didn't want to be stuck in traffic."
Yeah.
And I didn't know how long it would take to get there, so I just went on the safer side. And luckily, they didn't have any other interviews planned for that day, so they just saw me before my actual interview time.
Yeah, it's always good to be a little bit early. I wouldn't maybe recommend 2 hours early.
No, I wouldn't recommend 2 hours early as well. So I was sat in security, just sat there, just waiting for them to pick me up.
Oh. Well, okay, so as we've kind of said, you were really keen on this role with GE Aviation in the finance and planning kind of team there. So you probably had some expectations going in, and how did those expectations kind of weigh up with the reality of what you ended up kind of getting experience in on placement?
They were met and exceeded only because I went in just as COVID had started. We got into lockdown, and then lockdown ended, and then it started up again. So I went in there and I was like, well, I'm working for like a big company. I expected a lot with this little team because I knew prior hand that the team was very tiny and I would be able to work with each and every one. But what I did not know is that I would get to learn not only from the finance team, but from everyone else on site. And that was helpful.
So what kind of other teams were you able to get involved in? Did you?
So procurement, I worked with a lot. I worked a lot with the sales and commercial teams. And I also worked a lot with the senior leaders of every other individual team. Because then every month I had to prepare a report to send them how over budget or under budget they were. And every month they would come over and either dispute or argue and try to cut some money off of their budget.
Yeah.
So it was really helpful.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. I think that's a key thing is when we talk about teamwork, a lot of people think, okay, well, I'm going to be in the finance team, so I'll get great teamwork with the other finance reps, or I'm working marketing, so yeah, maybe I'll work with sales and marketing, but that's it. But really, in some of the roles, you do get to work across quite a lot of the different departments in that company or in that area, because you were in a regional place, weren't you? So
yeah, and you don't really realize how interlinked every department is and how dependent every department is on each other. So
yeah,
to see it in person,
which is great, and that's one of the big benefits I think of a placement is, we can teach you this at university, but when you actually see it in practice, that actually if you're over budget in this area, then we've got to cut it from your area or somewhere else, or those internal relations really come into kind of a key point there. So was there anything else that happened in your placement that was quite unexpected other than the obvious in the room, which is COVID?
I learned a little bit of Spanish whilst I was out on placement.
Brilliant.
Only because the company that acquired the site, it's a Spanish-owned company, and it's like really big in Europe for making parts and planes. So when we moved over to them, the finance director came over and we liaised a lot with the parent company's finance team. So I got to learn a little bit of Spanish while I was working on them. Mi español es poquito, but
es poquito. So you need to learn.
Yeah, but I know enough that
can you speak English? That's the other one.
I know enough that if I ever get stuck on a finance call that's in Spanish, I'll pick up keywords to understand.
I think my favorite thing about you learning a little bit of Spanish is everyone's going to think, oh, if we go to Spain, Rose will know how to get a table for 4 people. But actually what you'll be doing is, oh, do you need me to balance your books? Oh, yes. Bank requisitions, of course.
Yes.
My Spanish is limited to financial reporting and financial analysis alone.
Exactly. And even then, the language barrier, it helped me to learn of different modes of communicating, because I remember one time I had to prepare the report for the Spanish team out in Spain, and I kept sending them the numbers, but they just weren't getting where I was getting the numbers from. Okay. So I had to color code the numbers for them.
I mean, there is nothing wrong with a bit of color coordination. It helps me every day. It's a long-standing joke in our office with color coordination. Chloe has a color for everything. I schedule everything. So everyone knows where I am and what I'm doing based on the color in my Outlook calendar. So I will not shun a color coordination, and I bet it worked, didn't it?
It did.
Brilliant. Well, good. And so obviously it was a little bit of a strange placement year for everyone with COVID, but what would you say was the highlight of your placement year?
See, there are so much good things. I can't really pick out one.
Tell me a couple then, I don't mind.
But I would say my favorite moment was when I helped the finance director come up with the easier way for us to track our receivables. Because prior to that, we didn't have someone to track the receivables and understand how much debt we had out. So when I got a chance to sit down, analyze all of the information, and prepare a nice little neat report to him that we would then liaise with the sales team to chase up the money, I thought that was really good. And it made it easy for the company because it helped us collect some of the debt that we were owed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good thing in that highlight is sometimes it could be a like personal development thing, but a lot of the time it's just the benefit of having a placement student is they come in and say, okay, well, why do you do it like this? Because is this not, for example, like yours, are we not chasing that? Is that not being done? Or is there something we can put in place? And then suddenly everyone goes, oh yeah, why aren't we doing that? And that fresh set of eyes can help. And for you, that's kind of your little bit of a legacy you've left with that company of, okay, I actually implemented something that's really been helpful to that company and receiving or recovering that money as well. So that's a really nice highlight. I like that.
Yeah. And then something else, probably a personal one, was building my confidence when speaking to people.
Yeah.
Probably because I want to say thanks to COVID for that as well. Because when I started, I had to like be in the office a lot and kind of be on my own and learn from my predecessor routines and everything. And everyone was kind of stuck to working from home. Often I was the only finance team member on site. So when someone would have a finance question, I wouldn't know how to answer it, or I was a bit nervous to answer it. But the longer I stayed in the role, the more confident I gained in answering questions. And by the time I ended, my manager would just let me answer questions. Like they would send her emails and she would just be like, Rose, can you answer this for me?
There you go. Thank you. Speak to Rose, yeah. No, and confidence is a key one. I think we talk a lot about skills in terms of, Excel or the software you're using or team working, but confidence and those attributes in that you learn just from being in a workplace and having that exposure, like you're saying, to other people and communicating with different teams and almost having to do it if you're not the most confident speaker or with other people. It's something that I see with a lot of my students who are a little bit more reserved or introverted, where actually I get to the point where I get to see them 3, 4, 5 months into their placement and they'll get on a call with me now and be like, hi Chloe, how's it going? Whereas before they couldn't look me in the eye, and so it's really good to see, and I'm glad that you've found that, because it's definitely a good thing to have before you go out, graduate and go into your graduate role or whatever you might be doing in the next steps. Cool. So I always like to ask my placement students that do this podcast, what would you say is your one top tip in terms of securing a placement, or whilst you're out on placement, what would be your tip for any students?
For securing a placement, I would say utilize the placement team because they're there for a purpose and they do offer the help. So if it's given to you, just use it, and don't be afraid to go up there and ask. Don't be afraid to like show up to the placement office, just knock and ask for your placement advisor. Because I remember sometimes we just come to you, like no email in advance. It's Chloe, can you help, please?
I'm not naming names, but I remember at least 3 or 4 of you turning up en masse every so often. Just, I've got questions. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not busy, so you can come in. But if we are busy, come back later. Yeah.
And then whilst on placement, I would say always put your best foot forward or your best work forward, because you never know who's watching you and what impact that you're making on the business.
Oh, that's a nice one. Yeah, that's good. And I think that is a good point, because I'm sure everyone's always doing their best work, but it's always good to put that forward, because like you say, there are people not necessarily watching all the time, but it might get recognized, and that's a really good point for you to go forward and take opportunities elsewhere in the business or get involved in other areas or projects or things like this. And yeah, I like that.
And then don't forget that the first few months will always feel strange because that it's different to university. Where you don't really have a structure. You have your lectures and you have your seminars, and then the rest of it are kind of yours to do what you want with it. With work, it's a specific set of hours that you have to do your set jobs. So don't be alarmed if the first few months you kind of struggle to find a routine or a schedule to stick to. It took me like a few months to get into the rhythm.
And how have you found now coming back to university? Have you kind of kept that structure, or have you gone back to a bit of the university structure?
I have, because then after sitting idle for about a month after my placement, I couldn't do it anymore. So then I found a part-time job to take along final year with me. So then I still do my normal wake up for 7 and get ready and be out of the house for 9. And even on the weekends now, I wake up at 7 a.m. Like even if I don't have anything to do, I'm up by 7 a.m. It's just a routine that stuck with me throughout the year.
Is that nice? I found that when I went back to university, I kept mostly, if maybe I had a 10 o'clock lecture, maybe I left at 9 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock, but I found it was really helpful with, like you did, I found a part-time job. I was working that part-time job for 2 days a week. I was studying and in class for 2 days a week. And then I had a whole day in the middle of my week to kind of write all my assignments. And is that how you're finding it now? Kind of still working that?
So I work a few days a week. I work and then I'm at uni. And then because some of our seminars are online, you can attend them online and still like be at home. And then on Fridays I'm in that uni all day where I get to do my work and catch up on my studies. So it's really good.
So it's long lasting effects of placement is you get a nice structure and a routine. So that might be another benefit that we don't necessarily think about, that you can't put it on your CV, but it's probably a life skill that's quite handy.
It is. And then you get into the habit of like working.
Yeah.
Like when placement ended, I spent 2 weeks home and then I started complaining like I need something to do. I am bored at home.
And I think it's quite an adjustment. Like when I went back to university, I think it's about the same. I was doing 6 or 8 hours of class. 6 to 8 hours was one day at work for me. So I was doing 1 day's worth of work across the whole week. So readjusting back to university hours was crazy, which is why I felt a bit like, oh gosh, I've got so much time on my hands. Like, what do I do? I think I was, volunteering. I was doing everything, mentoring, like peer leading, like we have at the university.
Yeah.
I was doing everything to fill that time. So yeah, definitely I guess not a benefit we can stick on the CV or the LinkedIn profile, but definitely a benefit going forward.
Yeah, it does. And because it does help build your work ethic and it does help you like work harder, I guess.
Yeah. And in terms of, like we mentioned at the top of the podcast, so you're an international student. So is there anything kind of as a tip as an international student coming into this experience or going onto a placement program that you would kind of give to those other students thinking about joining a placement program as an international student?
One of the things I feared being an international student was that where I'm from, because it's so tiny, most people wouldn't have heard of like where I came from, and most of the experience that I had on my CV wouldn't be recognizable or as prominent as, say, someone who has worked in the UK and has like part-time jobs in the UK. But then I realized early on that skills are transferable no matter where you work. The skills, you can transfer them wherever.
Yeah.
And it's also an icebreaker being an international student, because then you get to tell everyone, hi, I'm from a nice little lovely island in the Caribbean. And most people haven't heard of the Turks and Caicos, so they go like, where is that? And I'm like, oh, it's just a tiny island in the Caribbean. Before I left, my manager was like, you know what, you're an advocate for the Turks and Caicos. You really have like told everyone about the Turks and Caicos here.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we have students come in as international students and they think being an international student is a disadvantage, or it's something different, and different is bad. Different is not bad. Different is brilliant. Even all my UK students, all of their experiences are different. They've all been to different schools, and all of those things are benefits because, just like you said, it could be an icebreaker, or it could be something that's, a follow-up question with an interviewer at that stage. Okay, well, where is the Turks and Caicos? Oh, you did work experience here. Oh, you speak this language because you're from this country. And that's really something that's going to be of benefit, or if not even of benefit, of note, and make something a bit more memorable. And I think, like you've just said, it's nice to be an advocate for your home country, home island. I'd heard of it, didn't know a lot about it before I met you. I'll definitely be looking at holidays to the Turks and Caicos when I can go, but it's
would
definitely
recommend it. I would say add it to your bucket list. If you visit any country in the world, visit the Turks and Caicos. You won't be disappointed.
I will definitely add it to the bucket list. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Rose. It's been lovely to hear more about your placement, but also you being back at university as well. So in the future, if there is anything that you want us to cover, as I said at the top of the podcast, you can contact us on placements.sbs@sutton.ac.uk, and we'll be back with more student or employer perspectives for the SBS Placements Podcast.